One of the most striking and exciting developments in mystery and suspense fiction over the past 20 years has been the rapid spread of the genre across the world, as more and more crime fiction from international authors is appearing in English translations and is being eagerly consumed by curious readers. Although you can now read examples of the genre from pretty much any country in the world, most people would agree that the rise of international mystery fiction has been spearheaded by what has come to be known as Nordic Noir. This term refers to crime fiction authored by writers living and working in a group of countries that includes Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland. Why has Nordic Noir become so phenomenally popular with readers of mystery and suspense fiction? Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that most people don't think of Scandinavia as a particularly crime-ridden part of the world. Instead, we tend to assume that Scandinavian countries are all liberal democracies with no serious social problems, largely thanks to a well-developed welfare state system that provides a safety net for the poor and vulnerable. Who can imagine crime being a serious problem in such a context? And yet, judging from the Nordic Noir writers, there's obviously more than enough crime to go around in Scandinavia. Perhaps it's the contrast between our idealized view of the region and the gritty reality that we find so intriguing. Apart from the relationship between ideal and reality, however, the other main factor that helps explain the success of Nordic Noir is the variety of work produced under that label. Ranging from police procedurals to private eye stories and featuring a wide variety of crimes committed by an equally broad range of criminals, Nordic Noir has something for every fan of the genre. The boom in Nordic Noir is a great example of a phenomenon we've seen in a number of other lectures in this course, namely the ability of different forms of mystery and suspense fiction to combine core features of the genre with local innovations. In this sense, the success of Nordic Noir mirrors the success of the genre as a whole. Thanks to the extraordinary popularity of Stieg Larsson's Millennium Trilogy, many people assume that Nordic Noir begins when Larsson's main protagonist, Lisbeth Salander, first walks onto the stage in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was originally published in 2005 and first appeared in English translation in 2008. Although this may be true in relation to the publishing boom aspect of Nordic Noir, the history of Scandinavian crime fiction goes back much further. In fact, I would date its origins to the summer of 1962, when Marge Schuwal met Per Warlow. At the time they met, they were both working as journalists, though Warlow had already published a number of novels. After they fell in love and started living together, they discussed writing a series of crime novels together. According to Schuwal, we wanted to describe society from our left point of view. Per had written political books, but they'd only sold 300 copies. We realized that people read crime, and through the stories, we could show the reader that under the official image of welfare state Sweden, there was another layer of poverty, criminality, and brutality. We wanted to show where Sweden was heading, towards a capitalistic, cold, and inhuman society, where the rich got richer, the poor got poorer. They planned the whole series out before they even began writing. It was to consist of 10 books, and together, the books would have the collective title, The Story of a Crime. What was the crime? Swedish society's abandonment of the poor and vulnerable. Once the series was underway, Schuwal and Warlow settled into an unusual but productive writing routine. Writing at night while their children were asleep, Each chapter of the novel was plotted out like a storyboard, and then they wrote alternate chapters before swapping completed chapters so they could each edit the other's work. According to Sjöwall, they paid a great deal of attention not only to detail, such as how long it would take for a character to travel from one place to another, in order to give the books a realistic feel, but also to matters of style. We wanted to find a style which was not personally his or not personally mine, but a style that was good for the books. We wanted the books to be read by everyone, whether you were educated or not. They succeeded, to put it mildly. The story of a crime series, as I indicated earlier, consists of the following 10 books, which were published at the rate of one a year between 1965 and 1975. Rosanna, The Man Who Went Up in Smoke, The Man on the Balcony, The Laughing Policeman, The Fire Engine That Disappeared, Murder at the Savoy, The Abominable Man, The Locked Room, Cop Killer, and The Terrorists. In my view, it is the best series of novels ever published in the mystery and suspense fiction genre, a must-read for anyone and everyone. What are some of the characteristics that make this series such a landmark in Nordic Noir? First of all, let's consider Sjöwall and Vallow's decision to write mystery novels rather than novels in another genre or literary fiction. Granted, they wanted the series to be read widely, but according to Marxist critic Ernest Mandel, in his indispensable book, Delightful Murder, A Social History of the Crime Story, mystery and suspense fiction is an inherently conservative genre because it's obsessed with the restoration of order in a bourgeois society. Looked at in this light, Sjöwall and Vallow's decision to write police procedurals might seem even more eccentric. Each novel in their series revolves around cases investigated by Detective Martin Beck and his colleagues in the Homicide Division of the Swedish National Police. Why choose to write about police officers if your aim is to expose how Swedish society is in the process of decaying, and as a result, more and more people are becoming vulnerable and falling into poverty? Because police officers, perhaps more than any other group in society, see the consequences of that decay vividly on a daily basis. In that sense, writing police procedurals was a logical choice on the part of Sjöwall and Vallow. Moreover, although the last word in The Terrorists, the final novel in the series, is Marx, which some readers have interpreted as meaning that the authors believe Marxism is the answer to the problems they examine, the series is very far from being politically dogmatic. Instead, the novels do their very best to show that Martin Beck and his colleagues are doing a difficult job under very difficult circumstances. In order to avoid making their work into an apology for the police, however, Sjöwall and Vallow are also careful to show that many of the problems their police protagonists face come from other police officers. Their superiors especially represent a faceless, inefficient, and uncaring bureaucracy that refuses to be responsive to the problems experienced by the other characters in the series, police, criminals, and victims alike. So, the way in which Sjöwall and Vallow humanize their police officer protagonists and then allow their readers to follow the details of their personal and professional lives is definitely one reason that the story of crime novels are so influential. But even more significant is how the authors use the form of the police procedural to examine a wide variety of social problems Swedish society was struggling with during the 1960s and 1970s. Although the main crime under investigation in any novel in the series is usually murder, Schuwal and Valo use this crime to introduce a number of related issues, including drug smuggling, political corruption, sexism, and pedophilia. They eventually connect all of these to what they see as the most serious crime committed by the most serious criminal, the state's systematic neglect of its citizens, a neglect that has murderous consequences, even if it doesn't have murderous intent. From its very beginnings, then, we see that Nordic Noir constitutes a socially conscious and progressive form of mystery and suspense fiction, and that social consciousness has remained its hallmark ever since. Many examples of the genre have used mystery narratives for this purpose, of course, such as Raymond Chandler's critique of the corruption of American society, and Paco Ignacio Taibo II's focus on the criminal actions of the Mexican state. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that no variety of mystery and suspense fiction has been more consistent than Nordic Noir in its focus on the powerful rather than the powerless being the main source of criminal activity. Jo Nesbo, a Norwegian novelist whose work we'll look at later in this lecture, has commented that Maj Schuwal and Per Valo were the godfathers of Scandinavian crime. They broke the crime novel in Scandinavia from the kiosks and into the serious bookstores. Many authors have benefited from their success, but perhaps none have been influenced more by the story of a crime series and its ethos than Henning Mankell. Mankell was born in 1948 in Stockholm, Sweden, and for the first part of his career, he focused mainly on working in the theatre, both in Sweden and in Mozambique, which over the course of his life became a kind of second home for him. He published his first novel, Bergsprängaren, which focuses on the Swedish labor movement, in 1973. But it wasn't until 1991 that he turned to crime fiction. In that year, he published Faceless Killers, the first in what would become a best-selling series of 12 novels featuring Kurt Wallander, a police inspector who lives and works in the Swedish town of Ystad. Like Schuwal and Valo's Martin Beck, Wallander is very far from being a heroic figure. Although he is a competent and committed investigator, Wallander's personal life is a shambles. His wife has left him, he's estranged from his daughter, he drinks too much, and he's been diagnosed with diabetes. He seeks an escape from all this in booze, in opera, but most of all in his job, which Wallander looks to as a way to give both his life and the world around him some meaning. This means that each of the investigations that Wallander conducts has a deeply personal dimension. But like the work of Schuwal and Valo, Mankell also uses the cases that Wallander works on to get his readers to think about the complexities of social issues facing Swedish society. For example, in Faceless Killers, Wallander investigates a case in which an elderly couple who lived on a farm have been found murdered. Johannes Lovgren was beaten and stabbed to death, while his wife Maria was found hanged. Maria's last word before she dies is "foreigner," which leads not only to a great deal of local speculation about the identity of the killers, but also to anti-immigrant sentiments and threats. Working against this background of community anger and prejudice makes Wallander's investigation even more urgent, and he eventually discovers that Johannes Lovgren was leading a double life that's connected to Sweden's complicity with the Nazis during World War II. The murderers are revealed to be Czech immigrants who sought political asylum under false pretenses in Sweden because of the country's reputation as a safe and liberal environment with a strong welfare state. What is the reader meant to do with this ending? On the one hand, in Faceless Killers, Mikael addresses the subjects of racism and national identity, as well as the need for Swedes to be aware of the complexities of their country's past. On the other hand, the moral that we're meant to draw from Mikael's examination of these subjects is less clear. As critic Anna Westerthal Stenport has commented in relation to Faceless Killers, we're led to question whether the Swedish welfare state would have been better off as a reclusive entity generously donating aid money to faraway trouble spots without experiencing itself any of the turmoil and social challenges that come with multi-ethnic coexistence. The point, however, is that neither Mikael nor his novel takes a firm stand on either side of this issue. Just as in Shuval and Valo's work, Mikael rejects dogmatism in what is otherwise a highly political work and instead encourages us to make up our own minds. If we now turn to the work of Stieg Larsson, I'm tempted to say that it's that same combination of politics and room for readers to draw their own conclusions that helps to explain the success of the Millennium Trilogy. However, a closer examination of Larsson's work suggests some different reasons for the iconic status of the trilogy within Nordic Noir. It's worth emphasizing just what degree of success we're talking about here. We can do so by taking a quick look at one of my favorite blogs, Better Book Titles, which was started by writer Dan Wilber several years ago. The purpose of the blog is to give new titles to both classic and new books that reflect more accurately the book's content, themes, meaning, or impact. The blog's better title for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the first novel of Larsson's trilogy, is The First Book I've Read in 6 Years. Yes, this new title is a snobbish dig at many of the book's readers, but it also reflects accurately the sense in which The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is an example of the ultimate crossover book. Like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series or E.L. James's 50 Shades of Grey, Larsson's trilogy was read by millions of people who usually wouldn't read books at all, let alone mysteries. What was it about Larsson's novels that made them so addictive for so many people? Even though the plots of the novels in the trilogy are quite complicated, it's worth summarizing at least one of them because doing so will help us answer this question. One of the trilogy's main characters is investigative journalist Mikael Blomkvist, who runs the magazine Millennium, which gives the trilogy its title. At the beginning of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Blomkvist has been convicted of libeling wealthy businessman Hans-Erik Wennerström. Blomkvist is then hired by another businessman, Henrik Wanger, after Wanger has checked into Blomkvist's background. This background check is conducted by the trilogy's other main character, Lisbeth Salander, a brilliant but socially awkward computer hacker. Under the cover of writing a history of the Wanger family, Henrik Wanger actually wants Blomkvist to investigate the disappearance of his grandniece, Harriet, who disappeared many years before. In return, Wanger promises to supply Blomkvist with evidence against Wennerström that will convict him and exonerate Blomkvist. Meanwhile, we learn that Lisbeth Salander was ruled legally incompetent as a child, and ever since her affairs have been controlled by a legal guardian. When that guardian, Nils Berman, rapes her, Salander gets her revenge by torturing him until he agrees to let her control her own affairs. Then, for good measure, she tattoos the fact that he is a rapist onto his chest and films the whole encounter so Berman can't retaliate against her. The two plots and the two main characters come together when Blomkvist realizes that he may be on the trail of a prolific and extremely dangerous serial killer. When he requests a research assistant, Vanger's lawyer suggests Salander, and the two of them start working together. After they identify another member of the Vanger family as the killer, that family member imprisons Blomkvist and is about to kill him when Salander shows up at the last moment. She rescues Blomkvist, and the murderer is killed while trying to escape. We're not done yet. As he promised, Henrik Vanger provides Blomkvist with evidence against Wennerstrom, but it turns out to be unusable. Using her skills as a hacker, Salander gets evidence against Wennerstrom that allows Blomkvist to both expose him and write a best-selling book about the case. For good measure, Salander also hacks her way into Wennerstrom's bank accounts and steals hundreds of millions of dollars from him, so that by the end of the novel, she is financially and emotionally independent of everyone except Blomkvist, with whom she seems to have fallen in love. What have we learned from this summary? A summary that, believe it or not, leaves out a lot of information about the book. The short answer is that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, like the other novels in the trilogy, has something for everyone. Larsen writes an extremely hybrid version of mystery and suspense fiction, in which we can see elements of the police procedural, the private eye novel, the political thriller, a serial killer narrative, a conspiracy thriller, and even a kind of romance, as we can see in Larsen's focus on the relationship between Blomkvist and Salander. That last point is worth lingering over for a moment. It's no accident that when Larsen's novels were translated into English, only the second volume in the trilogy, The Girl Who Played with Fire, has a title that resembles the original Swedish title. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was originally titled Men Who Hate Women, while the air castle that was blown up became The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. By emphasizing the word girl in all three translated titles, we can see the importance of both Lisbeth Salander and feminism to the trilogy as a whole. In the only interview that Larsen ever gave about the Millennium Trilogy, he mentioned that one of the inspirations for the character of Lisbeth Salander was Pippi Longstocking, the 9-year-old hero of a very well-known series of children's books by Swedish author Astrid Lindgren that first appeared in 1945. If this seems like a bizarre comparison, consider two facts. First, that Larsen also said that Salander was his version of what Pippi might have been like if she'd grown up, and that Lindgren's Pippi is unconventional, assertive, frequently gets angry, and is enormously strong. Part of the success of Larsen's trilogy, in other words, derives from the fact that Salander proves to be so successful in responding to the most unusual and dangerous circumstances, so capable of both defending herself and saving others, so committed to defeating evil and seeing justice triumph, that there's more than a little of the comic book superhero about her. For Larsen's devoted readers, this didn't compromise the real-world political resonances of the book at all. Just as we read Ian Fleming's James Bond novels for their combination of realism and fantasy, the same can be said of the way we read the many adventures of Lisbeth Salander in her crusade against misogyny, corruption, and crime. I hope I've made it clear that Larsen's success can be explained by how he both adhered to and simultaneously broke with the template established for Nordic Noir fiction by the work of Sjöwall and Wahlöö on the one hand and Mankell on the other. Although Larsen kept their emphasis on political and social progressivism and the critique of the Swedish state, he added layers of adventure, romance, and intrigue that turned his novels into blockbusters. Consequently, other writers working in the field at the same time as Larsen now had a wide range of possibilities to choose from when they wrote their own Nordic Noir narratives. In the final part of this lecture, I'd like to demonstrate this point by discussing briefly the work of some of the other most popular authors working today. Jo Nesbo is a best-selling Norwegian author of crime novels who started out as a stockbroker and musician before beginning his writing career. His series protagonist, Harry Hole, pronounced Hule but spelled Hole, is a troubled and alcoholic homicide detective who works in Oslo. On the whole, Nesbo eschews Larsen's focus on complex conspiracies involving large numbers of characters. Instead, in a series of novels that began with the publication of The Bet in 1997, Nesbo usually has Hule focus on a single complicated case, often involving serial killers, that combines elements of the police procedural and the psychological thriller. It's interesting to note that, although he's undoubtedly benefited from the boom in Nordic Noir, Nesbo feels somewhat ambivalent about the category. When asked by an interviewer how he felt about Swedish and Norwegian crime novels being lumped together, Nesbo replied that it may not seem this way for outsiders, since there are cultural, demographic, and geographical similarities in the stories, but I think the voices are very different. I actually feel more related to the American hard-boiled crime novel than the Scandinavian crime novel, whatever that is. This question about what exactly is Nordic about Nordic Noir comes up again if we look at the work of two female Norwegian crime writers, Karen Fossum and Anhalt. Both have been described by reviewers as the queen of Norwegian crime. Fossum's successful series featuring Police Inspector Conrad Sager is typical of Nordic Noir in the way it's rooted in the mundane details of police procedure. But as Fossum explains, the setting of her work is quite different. I use the setting of a small, rural Norwegian community, the kind of place that I know so intimately. I could never write a novel set in a big city because, frankly, I don't know what it would be like. As for Holt, who has worked as a lawyer and has even served as the Norwegian Minister of Justice, her series of novels features retired lesbian policewoman Hannah Wilhelmsen. Her books actually owe as much to Agatha Christie as they do to noir conventions. In 1222, the first novel in the series, Wilhelmsen finds herself stranded after a train accident, along with 268 other passengers, at a hotel in northern Norway located 1,222 meters above sea level, hence the novel's title. When passengers start to die off, Wilhelmsen has to use her powers of observation as she's paralyzed from the waist down after being shot in a gunfight to solve the mystery. 1222 sounds more like a locked room mystery in the manner of Christie's Murder on the Orient Express than a Nordic noir in the traditional sense. Perhaps this is why Holt once said, "I write about people, not about Scandinavia. It is never the principal goal for me to describe my own region. It is purely the means to a narrative end." Despite Holt's remarks, it's clear that the massive success of Nordic Noir, as we've seen in this lecture, comes precisely from the adroit way in which writers in this field are able to combine details of their local cultures with their own variations on the recognized conventions of mystery and suspense fiction. In that sense, Karen Holt's 1222, like the work of Schuwal and Warlow, Mikael, Larsen, Nesbo, and Fossum is thoroughly representative of this fascinating subgenre.